Hey troops, this is Jeff Evely, Ops Sgt-Maj with Veterans for Freedom. Back with you now. I have with me Tom Marazzo, a member of Veterans for Freedom who needs no introduction, and also Tom Quiggan, our intelligence officer with Veterans for Freedom. And we just wanted to take a minute to talk about what Globalist News has been up to with respect to James Topp while he's marching on the side of a highway. They've launched a smear campaign against him, basically trying to associate him with some kind of white supremacy or white nationalist or some kind of racism. So it's the heretic, basically. It's the heretic play in the Church of Wokeism. I'm just going to start us off here, I think, before we go to a roundtable with the article itself, just so everybody has a good flavor for what it is that we're talking about. Tom Q and I were just discussing the byline or whatever that is, because when we originally wrote this, it didn't, or when we originally read this, it didn't contain this editor's note. It says the URL for this story has been revised to omit a reference to white supremacist to avoid any misunderstanding that persons named in the URL are associated with that label. So if I didn't know better, I would say that the pressure is working. So they seem to be getting a little bit of a backlash on this, and the chinks in the armor are starting to show. So the title of the article is Good PR, Why Anti-Hate Experts Are Urging Politicians to Step Up Vetting Practices. So it says, before politicians attend any event, it's standard practice for them to look into who's going to be there. Though the techniques used for the screening process may vary, some political strategists say. Mistakes can lead to embarrassing gaffes at best, they say, and widespread condemnation at worst. We've seen this on all sides of the political spectrum, said Gary Keller, a conservative strategist with Strategy Corp, who worked as an advisor to former Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Quote, we've seen stories where all parties have had questions raised in the media about attending certain events and being photographed with certain people. Fresh questions are being raised about these vetting practices after Global News learned that a march multiple politicians attended earlier this summer, was organized by a person who has a history of posting Islamophobic comments online, who spoke at a rally attended by a self-proclaimed white nationalist, and who has expressed support for extremist groups in the past. So just one thing I wanted to point out here is that, speaking of people who need to vet the attendees of their events a little bit better, is anybody on here not some kind of a vile exploiter? Joshua Boyle, he's one of those Talibastards. His cover story is he took his family backpacking in the mountains of Afghanistan while war was on a family vacation, and got taken hostage by the Taliban. And I think they had like a couple of kids while they were in captivity. And as soon as they got back to Canada, he's sitting with the Prime Minister right there. So nothing shady about that. Jaspel Atwal, he attempted an assassination. I think that was in Vancouver. This guy, sex crimes, Peter Dalish, and I'm not going to attempt that. He's the VP of a terrorist organization, which I think is, I think that's a Pakistani organization. I'm not sure. But back to the article. Okay, so anti-hate and extremist researchers who say they have been monitoring this individual for years say political parties and staff need to step up their vetting practices. Quote, politicians absolutely have a responsibility to research and figure out who is the person who's putting this event on, said Elizabeth Simons, Deputy Director of the Canadian Anti-Hate Network. Okay, so we all know who these guys are, the Anti-Hate Network, but just in case nobody else does. Okay, here's a little something from the Wayback Machine. So this is what their website said on January 14th, 2022. It says, antihate.ca, this is the Canadian Anti-Hate Network. Our work is made possible in part thanks to a grant from Anti-Racism Action Program. So that's government funded. That's who they are. And they're on the records in committee saying that, yeah, they only police extremism on the right side of the spectrum. They're not there to necessarily protect Canadians from extremism, but they are there to go after right-wingers. And so that's from January 14th, 2022. Oops, I'm going the wrong way. Sorry. And here we have what is there now. So the Canadian Anti-Hate Network was previously the recipient of a grant from the Anti-Racism Action Program. That grant period ended in March 2022. The Canadian Anti-Hate Network is not currently receiving any government funds. So that's good news. I think we can kind of count that one as a win. What do you think, guys?
Yeah. I'm skeptical, but yeah. I'll take the win.
Yeah, me too. I'm similarly skeptical. So anyway, Anti-Hate is kind of the smear merchant wing of the current regime. And it's something like the Ministry of Love from 1984. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, when they say they're anti-hate, clearly it's just like in Orwell, it's the opposite, right?
Yes.
So the Ministry of Love is the Ministry of Hate. And if they're anti-hate, then they're pro-hate. So anti-hate and extremism researchers. Okay, sorry, I'll skip down to where I was here. So that's the Canadian Anti-Hate Network. And they say, quote, I mean, that's just good PR. Why wouldn't their team be looking into who the organizer is? And if they did look into who the organizer is, were they okay with that? So then they get down to who this evil organizer is, and it's Stephanie McAvoy, who is self-described on social media as the Ottawa organizer for a march against COVID-19 mandates that took place on June 30th and was named on the City of Ottawa permit application as the primary event contact. So June 30th, that was the day that James Topp was arriving in Ottawa. They're saying that she's listed on some permit somewhere. Now, I know Stephanie personally. I met her a couple of times, and I remember her telling me that she put in all kinds of permit applications just to try to hold dates for us because we knew that they were going to punt us all over the damn city and try to cancel everything and stuff like that. So, but I want to get a comment here from Tom Marazzo, because you were pretty close to the organization of this as well. And there was a video, I think, of James out there that stated, Tom and Drew were helping him organize Operation Top Cover. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, that is as soon as the Ontario election ended, which was, I think the voting day was on a Thursday. Obviously I lost, so I had plenty of time. Thank you, Ontario, for that. But especially Peterborough. I'm just joking there. But 3 days later, I was literally with James Topp in Wawa, and I was helping to organize not only the arrival or the top cover, but when James successfully got that meeting with all of the federal Conservative MPs. Now, all the MPs were invited. The only ones with a slight hint of moral courage were, 25 or so federal Conservative MPs that showed up to that. Mm-hmm. So, in terms of top cover, his arrival, his march into town, yes, I was heavily involved with all of that, and so was Drew. And even on the day, the actual final march into town, I just worked security. And I don't mean security as in doing the job of police. I'm just saying we were just trying to corral the public that came out. There was my count, the last 7 kilometers, we estimated there was approximately 600 people that were marching that last 7 kilometers with James. So we were doing really safety, less security, but more safety for the crowd, traffic control, working with the police. It was all very well organized and very well coordinated. And even that counter protest that was there that showed up as James was making the final stretch into the monument, the police took care of that issue. They actually kept that counter protest away from James. So, Veterans for Freedom, myself, various members of Veterans for Freedom in Drew took various pieces of that made sense to do it. But for the most part, it was mostly Drew and myself in the early stages of that, more around meeting with the MPs.
Right.
And then the final day. So, Stephanie, I can tell you a funny story about her, but I'll save it for later. But how she's getting dragged into this is it is so astonishing, which is probably why, Jeff, you invited me onto this podcast.
Yeah. And I understand why she's getting dragged into this, and it's so they can go after Pierre Poilievre.
Yes.
And they need to kind of draw that line, connect those dots, even though there's really nothing to connect. And so it's only a tacit kind of loose connection, but the reader is left with this kind of emotional impression that there's really something bad going on here,
Yeah.
So I'll show the statement that V4F put out. This was a joint V4F Canada Marches statement. And you can see that it's coming from Eddie Cornell on behalf of the Veterans for Freedom Steering Committee and James Topp on behalf of Canada Marches. It says, this statement is in response to the Global News article released on 18 August 2022 by Rachel Gilmore titled, Good PR, Why Anti-Hate Experts Are Urging Politicians to Step Up Vetting Practices. Please note that Ms. Gilmore did not reach out to Veterans for Freedom or Canada Marches prior to releasing this article. It has become standard practice within the mainstream media to quote organizations such as government-funded anti-hate network, liberal strategists, and self-proclaimed experts to attempt to smear their political opponents and tax-paying concerned voters who only seek to have their voices heard inside the political process. This article is an example of circular sourcing where everyone quoted is linked to the same source to look like there are multiple sources instead of contacting directly the organizations that are involved. As per James Topp video on 7 April 2022, the single point of contact for James' arrival in Ottawa was Tom and Andrew from Veterans for Freedom. James's arrival to Ottawa, subsequently titled Top Cover, was tasked directly to Lieutenant Navy retired Drew McGilvery from Veterans for Freedom as the sole organizer. Andrew had a distinguished 12-year career in the Canadian Armed Forces as a naval warfare officer with a breadth of experience on both the tactical and operational levels and experienced in the deliberate planning process. And then we have that's the post from our Facebook page. It's not highly visible there, but I do have it queued up here. Oh, did I take that one down? Oh, there we go. So here's the post that we made, reference that event right there. And it says, Top Cover being organized by V4F, kicks off 30 June 2022. Stay tuned. So they're trying to smear James by using Stephanie as the organizer, and we'll get into how they're doing that in a second. So they're trying to attach this white supremacy label to him using Stephanie when in fact she wasn't even the real organizer. So they didn't even bother to check with us, and you can see, we have a paper trail to show it here. So back to the last little bit of this here. It says, as per the article, Elizabeth Simmons, Deputy Director of the Canadian Anti-Hate Network, said, politicians absolutely have a responsibility to research and figure out who is the person who's putting this event on. That is great advice, and we can confirm that both politicians sought the actual organizers' details via James Topp and Canada Marches. Okay, so...
well, I want to add something to that comment.
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
I really would like to. You may not like somebody's, racial views or political views, but guess what? They're still tax-paying voters. And listen, before the our anti-hate morons come after me for this, because obviously they're going to be watching this. At the end of the day, whether you're a despicable person or not, you still get a vote. Okay, you still have a right to attend a political rally. You still have a right to meet the person that you're going to cast a ballot for. So, yeah, is it terrible for Pierre Poilievre to shake hands with an undesirable person in the eyes of many? You know what? That person still gets a vote. That's what a democracy is. And every veteran, in this group and probably in the world knows that, you still, as a soldier, are fighting for the right for people to hate you, right? And I don't condone white supremacy or any of that kind of stuff, but I do condone that everybody gets a vote. Everybody is entitled to the political process. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, and I guess I would say that everybody is afforded the same basic human dignity in our society here. So they're going after these people to smear them in some of the most heinous possible ways that they can come up with, and it's really, really gross, and irresponsible is not even the word. I mean, this is evil in my assessment, because it's intended to lead to harm. So it's a conscious decision to inflict harm, that is by definition, I would say, evil. Okay, so they're talking about Stephanie here and how she was on the City of Ottawa permit application as the primary event contact, which is not the same as the organizer. Global News has obtained a copy of the permit application. In 2018, McAvoy spoke at a small protest with the local media at the time described as anti-immigration and anti-Justin Trudeau. So I took a look at that real quick here. And anti-immigration rally on Hill fizzles, leader disappointed. So what they're doing here is they're going after this Dan Dubois guy because he's an Ontario Party candidate. And they're, going through, okay, so it's a disappointment to him, and that's not so great. And they're just trying to smear him in the same way that they're doing right now. They're trying to smear them as a bunch of racists. He's saying that right here himself. He's saying Dubois warned that sparse crowd on the Hill that mainstream media would do its best to call them a bunch of racists. And I think we pretty much all say that when we go out to our events. So that's pretty standard practice, given the state of affairs in Canada right now, especially with respect to the mainstream media. Okay. Sorry, any more comments before I continue reading?
No, keep going.
Okay. So the local media at the time, this is kind of how they launder their lies. Like, she's got a friend, an ideological ally in another media outlet, so she goes and she grabs that story from him, and they just keep circulating like this. So there's never anything to tie this Dan Dubois guy to any kind of criminal activity, hate crimes, association with any kind of white supremacist group or anything like that. It's just the same kind of smear piece, and they're referencing that smear piece here in order to give their smear piece a little bit of legitimacy, or the appearance of it at least. And they use this national president of the Canadian Combat Coalition, or C3, organized the event. According to its YouTube page, C3 describes itself as a non-profit multicultural group of Canadian patriots concerned with Canada's future in all respects. Quote, "We oppose mass immigration, open borders, New World Order, and Sharia law, it claims." I can't find much to disagree with there, quite frankly. I mean, I don't oppose managed immigration. I think that if we're going to have immigration, then the people in charge should manage it in a way that doesn't harm the people who are vulnerable in our society with higher, rents and so forth. But who wants to live under Sharia law? There are countries, like Iran and Saudi Arabia, where you can go live if that's what you want. But we don't really want that here. And New World Order stuff, I mean, that's been the word for a long time for, I think, what Tom calls elite capture. Is that about right, Tom?
Yes, indeed. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So when you start dissecting what they're saying, the thing is they'll throw in a quote like that, and it's out of the context of the entire speech. And there's a lot of context to fill out there. So they'll throw something in there like that, where they're not necessarily saying anything racist or hateful or anything. They're just talking about public policy, and they'll try to create that emotional impression in the reader again that there's something racist afoot here. So this is the kind of dirty tricks that they're up to all the time. And it says, on the YouTube channel on the eve of the 2018 protest, Dubois can be seen having a fireside chat with self-described white nationalist Kevin Gaudreau, who has a swastika tattooed on his chest. Gaudreau attended the protest. McAvoy, who was one of the official event speakers, can be seen in a YouTube video telling a cheering crowd that Canada was founded on Judeo-Christian principles. That's a common thing that people often say. I think the supremacy of God is actually in the Constitution. So
yes, it is.
Yeah,
it's right there, and I think in the first sentence in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
yeah,
And it's followed actually by a colon.
Yeah, and then what?
Everything after that is secondary to that first statement, which is found on the supremacy of God.
Right. So I don't really.
And I'm not making the case for religion. I'm making the case for actual fact.
Yeah, me too. 100%. And I've said on this podcast many times that I'm a pretty loud and proud atheist.
Yeah.
So I maybe take a little bit exception to the supremacy of God clause. I think we could probably come up with something better.
I agree too. I totally agree with you on that too. My whole point is the way I reconcile it in my mind is your version of God. And I'm happy with that.
Yeah, I try to think these days in terms of like the good. When people say God, I just think kind of the good, the ultimate good, like a concept, a form, like the ancient philosophers would have called it, it's just a concept. It's the good.
Yes.
I'm kind of cool with it. I understand that that's just a kind of a part of our heritage and where it all comes from. So it's not really high on my list of priorities right now in terms of political battle space. On with the article here. Global News has obtained a number of screenshots from McAvoy's social media. In one post, she says, it was just weird that a Muslim woman rang up her item at Victoria's Secret store. In others, she proclaims that she is pro-Proud Boy. Now, man, I could go into a deep dive about this, but saying Proud Boy, like they were declared a terrorist organization in a unanimous vote by our House of Commons, based on January 6th, which if you don't know that was a setup, a false flag to try to bait some decent people into a legal trap and go after the whole MAGA movement in the United States, then I suggest that you Google the name Ray Epps, and or maybe not even Google. You should probably go to Brave, but search up Ray Epps. Okay, he's pretty clearly just a plant on a contract from some security agency, probably the FBI. And he's the one who incites the breach of the Capitol on one side of the Capitol, where they're filming all that stuff for the mainstream media, and on the other side of the Capitol, the Capitol police are actually holding the doors open and letting everybody in. So they're putting this in there, pro-Proud Boy, because that's a fraternity that was founded by Gavin McGuinness, who was a Rebel News contributor back in the day. He's Canadian. He lives in he lives in New York, and he's got an Indigenous wife and like 4 Indigenous kids. So they're trying to make this into something white supremacist and terrorist, because that's what they're saying the Proud Boys are, when in fact they're just a fraternity, and nobody can even name a terrorist act that they've ever even so much as attempted.
Well, and an important thing here with this too is that her reference to Proud Boys was prior to them being designated as a terrorist group in Canada.
That's an important detail.
So, of course, they have to throw that forward right now because it's further defamatory, right?
Right. Unfortunately for Stephanie. And, I've only met her a couple of times, but she seems like a lovely lady. So, it really kind of torques me what they're doing here, throwing this good woman under the bus just so they can get to Pierre Poilievre. So here's Stephanie McAvoy, and she says, note to Facebook AI, I hate leftist anything. Get a clue. I don't want to see CNN, CBC, or any mainstream media posts. I am pro-Judeo-Christian principles, pro-Israel, pro-gun, pro-life, pro-USA, pro-Trump, pro-Cops Lives Matter, pro-Men's Lives Matter, pro-men's equality, pro-Proud Boy, pro-veteran, pro-military. I do not want to see anything progressive, which is actually regressive. I've been saying the regressive left for years. She's very pro a lot of things, but there's nothing nefarious about any of that. Those are just for political positions, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So here it goes on with the Proud Boys again. The Proud Boys, a far-right group whose members were involved in the January 6th Capitol Hill mob, I'm glad they're not calling it an insurrection at least, were designated a terrorist group in Canada last year. Global News contacted McAvoy over Facebook to ask for her comment on a decision to speak at the C3 rally, as well as her social media posts about Muslims. She did not reply to a request nor multiple follow-up requests. The march McAvoy helped organize centered around a man named James Topp, a Canadian soldier who has spoken out against the federal government's COVID-19 vaccine requirements and is now set to face court-martial. Who had been walking across the country to draw attention to his opposition to vaccine mandates. Okay, so while the permit application itself was denied, the city says it wasn't submitted in time. Among other reasons, the march went ahead as planned. 4 people were arrested after Topp arrived at the National War Memorial in what Ottawa police characterize as an interaction during which they said an officer was choked. And we did a previous video on that with Tom here as well. He was, like he said, on the security detail. So he got a front row seat for the whole thing. But not only that, he, along with some other Vets for Freedom, were instrumental in de-escalating that situation between some other folks that were just kind of there walking, I think, and the police. That sound about right, Tom? As you recall?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and that was before. I think he actually went to the tomb and all that too. So they still went ahead with a very peaceful ceremony even after those arrests took place.
Yeah,
that's just the kind of thing, the risk that you run when you bring a ton of people together like that in any public setting. So they're trying to make it out to be something violent when in fact it was something very standard in terms of large gatherings. Before the march arrived, I would say something very standard except for the officer choke part. There is some pent-up anger out there, that's for sure. Before the march arrived at the War Memorial, a handful of politicians, including Conservative leadership candidate Pierre Poilievre and People's Party of Canada leader Maxime Bernier, briefly walked alongside the group. It's unclear whether they were aware of McAvoy's role in organizing the event, as multiple requests for comment and follow-up attempts were left unanswered over the course of more than 2 weeks. We already read the statement. McAvoy was not the organizer. They're just kind of running with this so they can tie these other, the C3 folks who are unfortunately named a lot like our C3 folks. They're the Canadian Combat Coalition, and we're with the Canadian Citizens Coalition. Actually, I think I'll take a sec just to kind of make that distinction here, because I have maybe I don't. Here it is. Canadian Citizens Coalition right here. So as you can see, like, they're spending a lot of time talking about this C3 Canadian Combat Coalition because I think our organization that provides basically a backbone for a lot of these other organizations like Canada Marches and Veterans for Freedom, Canadian Frontline Nurses, Taking Back Our Freedoms. Like, these are all the organizations that are endorsed by Canadian Citizens Coalition, and they're essentially providing us with backbone service, kind of like a vetting service for other organizations, stuff like that. It's important to make sure that distinction is made, I think. Okay, so they got the politicians that they want kind of attached to this idea of racism and questions about political vetting. The June 30th march is far more the June 30th march is far from, I think, the first time politicians have come under criticism for people associated with events they've attended. Justin Trudeau being no exception, as I pointed out. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau faced a firestorm of criticism in 2018 when a convicted failed assassin was invited to a reception he attended. That same year, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh was forced to disavow Sikh separatists after extreme elements showed up to the same rally he was attending. Earlier this year, after attending a so-called Freedom Convoy protest, Conservative MP Michael Cooper released a statement condemning Nazism because of a flag bearing a swastika flew behind him during an interview with CBC News. And I'm pretty sure we all know that was Justin Trudeau's photographer. Okay, quote, "If you were attending a rally, you should know who's organizing," close quote, said Armanath Armasaringam, an assistant professor at Queen's University an expert on extremism. If politicians don't do due diligence before attending a rally, he added, it could send a message to those in attendance. I just want to show that they're conflating a couple of things here. So when they're talking about extremism, most people, when like the way the narrative is structured right now, when they say extremism, like disavow Sikh separatists, on the left, that means political violence. That's what extremism is and always has been up until very recently. And again, we have the criticism of Jaspal Atwal that I pointed out there on the meme, because he attempted to assassinate somebody. So when we're talking about extremism on the left, they're talking about political violence. But when we're talking about extremism on the right, we're just talking about online speech, online dialogue that they disagree with. And I've pointed this out in the past too, but that's what's happening here. The politicians don't do due diligence before attending a rally, he added. It could send a message to those in attendance. It says either you agree with their broader agenda or you're not paying close attention to the rallies that you attend, said Amara Singham. I'm willing to bet that this professor has never organized a political rally before. According to Keller, politicians have different capacities for political vetting. If you're in government, as the Liberals are right now, he said, you can consult the RCMP about events you plan to attend. Other politicians are often left to rely on their own screening efforts, he said, through tools like Google. Quote, there's obviously a very large difference between the tools available to the members of the government in Canada and tools available to everybody else, Keller explained. According to Susan Smith, a Liberal strategist and co-founder of Blue Sky Strategy Group, it would be impossible for political staff to screen every single attendee of a large event like a protest or a march, obviously. Still, she said, quote, any good leadership team is checking out who's organizing a particular event before you make a decision that your candidate is in attendance. So again, she wasn't even organizing. She was listed as the primary point of contact on the permit application. Politicians are responsible for deciding who attends events they plan, Keller said, and when they go to go out to attend an event with the public, there, quote, are always inherently risks. Quote, you never know who shows up at your events, he said. But at the end of the day, the politician's a public figure and they're the one responsible and are accountable to the general public, Keller said. It's unclear whether politicians who attended the June 30th march were aware of McAvoy's role in organizing the event. She was the point of contact, and she attended another event that they're trying to tie to white nationalism so they can go after that Ontario Party candidate there. But none of this, like this foundation is made of sand. So multiple requests for comments sent to Poilievre's team over the course of 2 weeks, including 4 follow-ups, were left unanswered. McAvoy also did not reply to Global News requests for comment over the same period of time. Bernier's team also did not respond to requests for comment. Smith said that if Global News was able to learn details about the march's organizer, however, political staff likely would have been able to do the same. It's highly unlikely that the leader themselves would be making this phone calls to find that out, she added. Quote, but they should be asking those questions and they should be making the decision, close quote. Okay, guys. So with all that said, we haven't heard from Tom Quiggan on this one yet. What do you think there, Q-Man?
You're on mute, Tom.
You're on mute, Tom.
Yeah, I was just saying that there are so many things wrong with this article. It's absolutely stunning. But I think the most important one is the article goes on at great lengths about how everyone failed to vet. Nobody went to find out who's actually organizing the thing, and they blame Stephanie McAvoy for all of this. And of course, the article itself is fundamentally wrong. Stephanie had nothing to do with organizing the march into Ottawa. Zero, zip, nothing. I know what she was doing. I was working with her at the time, but it had nothing to do with organizing the march. So the entire article is critical of people not vetting to get the right information. And of course, Global News, or Globalist News, as you like to call it, has published an entire article that is completely false on all the basic facts. So fascinating thing. Now, The other thing that's interesting here, and Globalist News is already trying to cover their butts on this one, is in the URL for the article, they actually put in, like James Topp, white supremacist extreme right.globalnews.ca or whatever the heck it was.
Mhm.
And of course, I don't know if folks know much about libel law, but in libel law, it's been well established that even if something is in the headline, where it says something bad in the headline, but it's not in the rest of the article, the headline itself is deemed to be more damaging than the article itself. And that principle extends itself to the URL. The reason they probably put white supremacist and extremist right in the URL is so you'll find those kinds of articles when you go looking for that kind of thing. In other words, not only did they get this entire article completely wrong, in fact, they tried to use the URL as a racist slur against James Topp and by extension against Stephanie McAvoy, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't think I'm spilling any beans here when I say that James Topp is undergoing the steps to launch a libel action against Global News. And of course, we can see they've already tried to backpedal with this, totally ambiguous statement where it said the URL for that story has been revised to omit a reference to white supremacists to avoid any misunderstanding that persons named in the URL are associated with that label, which of course is a completely bogus statement. When you put James Topp, white supremacist after each other, you're very clearly trying to make that association. So anyway, I think the threat of the libel action has already got Global's attention. And just a personal comment here, if that action goes ahead and if I participate in the trial, I'm thrilled to be a part of it. I will love to testify in it. Why? Because Rachel Gilmore has a long history of slurs, false information, everything you can possibly imagine. So just a couple of quick examples as we talked about off screen here earlier. The first thing would be she actually put out a statement in 2020, November of 2020, saying the Great Reset. The language a Tory MP using here is a debunked conspiracy theory. So Rachel Gilmore has tried to run this theme for a couple of years that if you're talking about the Great Reset, that's because you're some sort of conservative conspiracy theorist, and that's what you're all about. So what she forgets to notice, of course, is that Klaus Schwab, the guy who's head of the World Economic Forum, wrote a book called COVID-19 and the Great Reset.
Yeah.
So that's kind of an issue. Now, let's take a look at the Bank of Canada, for instance. The Bank of Canada has a briefing out on the exact same thing. The Bank of Canada talks at great lengths about the economic issues around the Great Reset. So according to Rachel Gilmore, if you talk about the Great Reset, that's because you're a conservative conspiracy theorist. So I guess at this point, we can say the Bank of Canada is run by people who are conservative conspiracy theorists, or there's something else wrong. So let's move past the Great Reset. On screen there that you just had, Jeff.
Yeah.
She also put out this thing during the convoy that supported the idea that the apartment fire was a part of the convoy. The convoy tried to burn down the apartment. And the guy who made that statement is a wonderful, trustworthy person, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, just like this article she just put out, there's only one problem with it. It's completely false. The fire at the apartment had nothing to do with the convoy. The Ottawa police investigated it. They arrested a couple of people. And guess what? It's totally false. So that's just a quick overview. But it's fair to say that Rachel Gilmore has a long history of putting out false and misleading information and attacking other people by using racial slurs, political slurs, etc., etc. But just to repeat it again, I think the funny thing about this article is it's a whole great big long article on how people like Pierre Poilievre and Maxime Bernier need to do better vetting in order to get accurate information. Of course, the entire article is completely false. That to me is the funniest thing going. Now, we also had a couple of professors quoted there who are supposed experts on, oh, yes, people need to do better vetting. Well, my advice to the experts in the article is you might want to complain to Global News, get your name pulled out of the article because you just got drawn in by Rachel Gilmore into making completely false statements. So anyway, that's just kind of my overview. As an intelligence officer and as someone who's testified in court and whose expertise in court has been recognized specifically as being the reliability of intelligence as evidence, I can't wait for this to go to trial. I hope it goes to trial, because Global News is going to take a monster hit on this, because not only are they publishing an article which is libelous, it's also completely false, and it's written by a person on their staff who has a long, continuous history of pushing false information. So yeah, this is an amazing situation. Hard to say whether Global News will come out and apologize for this. In other words, get themselves out of the libel case, or if they're going to try and defend Rachel Gilmore, who, by the way, has a history of writing for some other interesting outfits. But that's another story for another day, Jeff.
Yeah, and just to give another example, like this is the same author here, Rachel Gilmore. She's got a real hate on for veterans. She's been going after Jeremy McKenzie pretty hard. He's one of our brothers. He's with V4F. He does his own podcast like he's been doing for years. And she disagrees with some of the views that he has. And they've been in the habit on the left of sort of psychologizing everybody for a number of years now. I'll give an example of the kind of shenanigans that they're up to here, because they're going after Pierre Poilievre. He's marching with James Topp. And what they're saying here is that Poilievre leads march of convoy protesters beside man with far-right extremist ties. So James Topp is the man with the far-right extremist ties, and they're basing that on the fact that he showed up on Jeremy McKenzie's podcast for a little chat there. So, and again, this is how they launder their lies. So they're out there lying about McKenzie and saying that he's all kinds of things. He's right at the center of the Emergency Measures Act inquiry because of the whole farce around Diagolon, where they were using his fake meme country to gaslight Canadians into going to war against our own citizens, essentially. So it's just lies built on top of lies. And there are all these kind of loose associations where what they do is they sort of psychologize them. They say if they make a certain comment, they can even so much as loosely be tied to anything related to race at all, then you're a racist, even if it's something positive. So
one other quick comment here on racism. The entire article that we're talking about here is based on, the sort of theory of white supremacy, and that James Topp is a white supremacist, and, McAvoy is a white supremacist, and oh my God, everybody is a white supremacist. Funny story here. Stephanie McAvoy's family, when you trace them back, are actually Lebanese Jews. So how one gets from Lebanese Jew to white supremacist, I'm not quite sure. But that's another point where Rachel Gilmore in court would be asked the question, well, how did you establish that a Lebanese Jew was a white supremacist? Yeah. And of course, I'll be sitting there waiting to hear the example and the answers for that one. But that's the kind of thing that's going on, is this, the current discourse, the current narrative amongst the mainstream media that everybody that Trudeau doesn't like is a racist is crumbling. And of course, professors like Gad Saad in Montreal have been called white supremacists, and he's another Lebanese Jew. And it's like, Lebanese Jews must be sitting there going, how the hell did we go from being Lebanese Jews who had to leave the country out of fear of genocide to now being called white supremacist? It's absolutely fascinating to see how the progressive ideology is capable of literally inverting every idea. And as you mentioned, anybody now who identifies as anti-hate is mostly pro-hate. If they identify as anti-fascist, when you dig into them, it turns out they're really fascist. And when you dig into a number of these so-called white supremacists, it turns out they actually come from ethnic backgrounds who's been the victim of this sort of stuff. So one of James Topp's, I won't name him here, everybody knows who he is, I guess, but one of James Topp's organizer on the ground is a V4F guy who's being called a white supremacist, but his family are actually Iranian Kurds, who are one of the most persecuted groups on the face of the planet for the last 1,000 years. Mm-hmm. So again, how do we go from a guy who's an Iranian Kurd, and he is then portrayed as being part of a white supremacist group. So I do take a bit of heart in this article in the sense that it is so incredibly bad that it's even got the attention of global news, where they've been forced to already issue this weasel-worded attempt to slither their way out of it.
Ugh.
But anyway, to me, that's a good news. And I think this libel case, if it goes ahead, is going to be brilliant.
Yeah, me too. And I really hope it does, because we need to start seeing some consequences for some of these people and the kind of polarization that they've incited. And that is the thing. That's why I titled this, "The Globalist News is Just ISIS," because that was something that they did, right? Like there was the wasn't it them who got somebody so riled up about white supremacy in Winnipeg that they went out there and ran down a bunch of people?
Yeah. It was they ran over 4 people. Interestingly, that person was out on bail the next day, right, for attempted murder charges, but yet they suddenly got out on bail the next day.
Yeah.
Right. And when it is, let's look at the language of, the churches being burned. It was over 50 churches months ago. And Trudeau says things like, well, it's understandable.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like the hypocrisy of this type of government-funded media, like it is so off the charts. Like I don't even want to say it's laughable. Like there's not a proper adjective I could come up with this thing, like to describe the government-funded media's characterization of the country we now live in. I tweeted today about it because I was looking at some of the Rachel Gilmore stuff, today. She apparently, and listen, I'm not going to pile on somebody who may or may not have legitimately been threatened yesterday with a gun, because I don't condone violence against a journalist or any other person. But my point when I, commented on that tweet was, I don't think that, it's right for people or the media to target each other, which then incites violence towards other people, right? And it's a very subtle way to say, like, you kind of have set the conditions for these kinds of things to come your way, without actually saying that, you reap what you sow. But the media can't run around and get all butthurt because they have been running around for 29 months and building up this anger, this pressure that you talked about, Jeff, this pent up anger for all this time. And then all of a sudden act like they're the victim.
Yeah.
Because, 2 weeks ago, Jeremy did on the 13th or the 12th, he put out a Instagram video, which I personally thought was hysterical, because that's Jeremy's style. That's why he's popular. That's why people listen. In his own unique, funny way, he articulates how everybody else is feeling and thinking. And so he commented on Rachel, and I got a request from the Toronto Star, a bunch of questions. And they were trying to box me in because I retweeted Jeremy's video, and I commented that I agreed with everything Jeremy said in there. Yeah. And so then apparently there's an extended version that I never saw, and I don't care. Yeah. But he's trying to box me in with these questions to say, Jeremy's calling for blah, blah, blah. And you said you don't disagree with anything he said. So do you think it's good to incite violence against journalists? I'm like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? That's rich. Because, exactly, it'll be tomorrow. A year ago tomorrow, the Toronto Star, the Toronto Star, the very paper asking me about this, put on the front page of their newspaper a bunch of quotes of all this vitriol hate against unvaccinated Canadians. Talking about, I don't care if they die, they don't deserve ICU beds, the whole bit, right? And so when the media, they claim to be the virtuous holders of all things true, but then they claim to be the victim when people raise objection to their stupidity. It's incredible to watch. It's incredible to watch.
I think it's much worse than that, actually. I think it's more like people are standing up to their bullying finally.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
as soon as they stand up to their bullying, they go, oh, you people are violent.
Yeah. Let me just add here, if I was to testify tomorrow in court on this entire Rachel Gilmore situation, this particular article in a very narrow sense, I would say, yes, the article is fundamentally wrong. So the Global News is not capable of publishing accurate information on this subject, which is a big issue. It was also done completely as a racial slur against James Topp, Stephanie McAvoy, and anybody else they could kind of throw in there. But more importantly, all knowledge is contextual. So I would argue that this article doesn't exist in isolation. It's not like she wrote one article once and managed to get it wrong, in which case, you know, maybe it's excusable, maybe it's understandable. You know, everybody makes mistakes. Let's be clear on that. But this is an article which fits into the context of an incredibly long paper trail of all of our articles, which have a complete, absolute, total, and fundamental bias in them. It's traceable, it's trackable, it's descriptive, et cetera, et cetera. So I think globalist news, or global news, I guess more correctly, has a problem on its hand. Is, do they want to go to the mat defending this, or are they going to find some way, as I said, of slithering out of this through an apology? Because there is a problem. So my argument to the court would be to say, look, not only is this article false, and it's willfully false, they probably knew most of this was wrong. What they are attempting to do in company with the government of Canada, who's funding them, incidentally, is they are trying to create a political space where they agitate people so badly, they know there's going to be a violent response. They know people are going to respond violently. So they, on the one hand, go out and create this continuous stream of hateful articles where they target everyone who they disagree with. And then as soon as anything happens, they claim, as Tom points out, they're the victims of all of this. In other words, I would argue they're willfully trying to create a political space where violence becomes acceptable. And that, to me, is the biggest single issue here. That's the problem. And I do believe that by targeting Global News with libel suits, it's going to cause them to correct, hopefully to a certain degree, but time will tell.
Yeah, time will tell. And since you mentioned the history here, I just thought I'd pull up her page on Global News website, and here she is. She hates veterans, and she's always trying to smear us as terrible, violent racists. And her name is Rachel Gilmore. And if you just scroll down, like, there's some stuff there that's maybe not related to smearing people, but here's the second article. Diagolon, what you know about the group whose founder shook Pierre Poilievre's hand. Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's Jeremy.
Yeah.
He's like a comedian. He's a color commentator, for crying out loud. Like, who did he ever
does
hurt?
Political satire. That's what he does.
Yeah. Who did he ever harm?
It's funny. It's funny.
Yeah. The irony of all of this is Jeremy doesn't even like Pierre. He did that for a stunt in order to provoke people, in order to mock them. Yeah, and of course, people like Rachel Gilmore jump on it as though it's real, as everything else. I mean, Diagolon's not real, and even I think she's figured that out. And now they're trying to say, well, we know it's not real, but, you know, that could cause a problem. And it's kind of like, wow, kind of like you publish fake information on your news site, and maybe you're trying to provoke a reaction. Anyway, interesting times ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, no kidding. How podcasts have become misinformation machines, and what can be done about it?
Well, that's what Bill C11's for.
Yeah, you're right.
They
just can't stand anybody thinking differently than they do.
So, Jeff, reread that last headline and take out podcast and put in Global News, and then see where you go. How Global News has become purveyors of fake information, and what can you do about it? I mean, this is where we're at, where the media has become the problem. So, not to give too much away here, but Jeff and I are working on another show, and what we're going to actually describe to Canadians is how almost all hate in Canada right now traces back to one place: Government Ministry of Canadian Heritage. So that's another show for another time. I'm not going to say anything else now, but this is something we found over the last few weeks. We started tracing back, where's all the hate speech in Canada coming from? And weirdly enough, when you drive it all back to its roots, most of it comes from the Department of Canadian Heritage. But anyway, that's another story for another day, Jeff.
Yeah, we're going to have to do a deep dive on that really soon. I think it's pretty important for people out there to understand the mechanics of it a little better. That it appear anyway, at least, to be they're using heritage to fund these brown shirt organizations like Anti-Hate, who then activate Antifa, and they go out and start harassing good people like James Topp. So this is the government funding harassment of Canadian citizens who disagree with them in the most egregious possible way, too, because what she's saying here is that James Topp is a white supremacist, let's say a Nazi, for example. And, what did we do with Nazis? Well, we hanged them, we killed them, right?
Yeah.
Hunted them to the ends of the earth. And so what does that say about James Topp? Like she asked the question about podcasters, what to be done about them? Well, what to be done about James Topp? It doesn't take a whole lot of connecting the dots for us to end up with another one of these vehicle attacks like we had in Winnipeg. And, we have James Topp walking across the country on the side of the Trans-Canada Highway. So what is Rachel Gilmore really going for here? It sounds to me like she's essentially the Ayatollah, and she's putting a fatwa on James Topp and saying, if you want to show your fealty to the Ayatollah, then you go ahead and take care of James Topp for him, like he's Salman Rushdie or something,
Yeah. If I can, I want to say something about James. I've known James since I was 23 years old. I first met James in 1996. Him and I did a course together for 6 weeks. And I can tell you, James is one of the smartest men I've ever met in my life. He is one of the most skilled soldiers I've ever met in my life. The training that I did with him, the particular course I was on with him, he was the top candidate. He's a brilliant man. I wouldn't be surprised if he had an actual photographic memory. He is incredibly, incredibly patriotic to this country. He has done 5 operational deployments, and he was a veteran of the Medak Pocket in Croatia. Mm-hmm. He's done 2 combat tours in Afghanistan. He's walked across the majority of this country already. Mm-hmm. And he's not giving up on this country. He's not trying to destroy it like people like Rachel Gilmore, who have found a way to monetize hate. James is begging for donations so that he can walk and spread a message of peace and patriotism and the love of his country, because he has given everything for this country. Mm-hmm. Everything. He has risked his life literally for 2.5 years of his life for this country. And to see this nothing, nobody, pathetic excuse as, a so-called journalist who invents news but doesn't report it, I find it such an affront to, what it really means to be a Canadian who cares about their country. She disgusts me. And I don't say that in terms of, who she is as a person. I say that in terms of the lack of professionalism that she has, the lack of regard for the people that, see to it that she has the right to be a vile human being, which is done by veterans in this country. It's not done by any other people. Veterans fight for people that even hate them. And James has done that 5 times in this country, mm-hmm. in overseas deployments. And so when I see this garbage coming out of a nothing nobody who's just trying to find whatever path of least resistance to the very top of her food chain, and do every despicable, say every horrific thing about really amazing Canadians who care about this country, it really offends every sensibility that I have about the media. It really does.
One other quick comment here. There's a company in the United States called Rasmussen. They do polling, and they're regarded as a sort of reasonably reliable polling company. They just did another poll on trust in the media in America, and perhaps surprising to no one, the numbers they got were the lowest ever. People increasingly distrust the mainstream media, and when people were asked about fake news and disinformation, the majority of people in the United States believe that the mainstream media is responsible for most of the disinformation. That's how bad it's getting. The other thing that just coincidentally came out this week, the war in Ukraine is into its 6th month. And so here we have Rachel Gilmore and some other journalists complaining to the government of Canada that, oh, people send mean tweets and people say mean things about us, and the police need to step in and start, investigating people that say mean things about us. Well, meanwhile, in Ukraine, over 10 journalists have died because there's journalists who are on the front line in a real war facing real threats. And they're suffering. They're wounded. They're dead.
There was a time when it was a respectable profession.
Yeah, and yet here we have Canadian journalists, so-called journalists, who are running a government narrative at government cost, whining because of mean tweets. So my advice to those journalists who put that complaint forward through the Canadian Association of Journalists, go do 2 weeks in Ukraine, go to the southern Sudan, go to Albania, go to Belarus. Hell, go to Baltimore or Philadelphia or Chicago for a couple of weeks. See what real journalists in the real world are doing, where they suffer, where they're taking pain.
Yeah, Twitter's not a real place.
Yeah, and
maybe,
then
get out there in the field a little bit.
Yeah, and then come back to me and explain about how mean tweets are bad. And by the way, my advice to Canadian journalists, if you want the mean tweets to stop, if you want the threats to stop, here's an idea. Do some investigative journaling. Start telling the truth. Start doing some actual investigative reporting. Start holding the government accountable. Hell, Canadians will get behind you and support you. They will regard you as heroes. Any journalist right now that started doing real investigative journalism to hold the government accountable would be an instant Canadian hero. Anyway, end of rant. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I recorded yesterday a monologue. That seems to be a good format for me. And I'm talking about the media. I'm talking about Diagolon and James and veterans and the way the media is. I'm calling them out. And you're right, Tom, about the Twitter and Jeff. Twitter's not real. And it is amazing to me the amount of absolute hate that I get. I am downrange of so much online hate. It's incredible. But guess what? It doesn't bother me one bit. And like Drew says all the time, he's like, listen, our Veterans for Freedom members have taken incoming enemy fire. Do you think that some anonymous, Ukrainian flag waving moron on Twitter is going to hurt our feelings or intimidate us or whatever? Like I've laid on top of a line mine diffusing it. I've jumped out of the planes. I've been on the ranges. I've done it. I'm not a combat veteran like James or Jeremy. But I've done pretty much as much of the risky things that you can do in the Army. And you think a Twitter moron is going to intimidate or make me lose any sleep? It's just incredible. It's just incredible that these people think that their words matter. But the journalists seem to think that it's real. That, oh my God, you're hurting my feelings. You're putting my life in danger. Come on, do better. Do better.
Yeah, exactly. There's some confirmation bias there. I think that they're just kind of low character individuals who kind of haven't mastered their impulses just yet. So every little kind of peak of their feelings, their anxiety or whatever on Twitter, they think it's like mortal danger. And I'm like, no, it's not even real. So
one more quick thought here, Jeff. Here's the thing to Canadian journalists, Rachel Gilmore in particular, but the whole bunch of them. Your job as a journalist is to hold things accountable. Big government, big business, big power. If you're writing something and nobody's getting angry, you're failing. That's the basis of journalism. Your job is to hold the bad people doing bad things accountable. So you're not supposed to live in a safe space. You're supposed to live in the real world where real things happen. Being a journalist requires a certain amount of moral courage and a certain amount of physical courage, just like being, a soldier. So here's my advice. Go back to your safe space, play with your Play-Doh, frolic with your puppies, munch on your crayons, whatever it is you do in your safe space, do it. Then get some moral courage, go out in the real world and recognize the fact that journalism, by its very nature, is a high-risk, high-pain occupation because your job is to hit the bad people head on and hold them accountable. Murderers, thieves, crooks, corruption, that's your job, to go after bad people. So bottom line, once again, if you're not upsetting somebody as a journalist, you're a failure. Get over it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I kind of said, coming toward the end of my career, like, if you didn't make any enemies, then you probably just never stood for anything.
Yeah.
And I want to say again, like, I really, I think this really crosses the line. I think she really is trying to set up James Topp here. I don't know. You can't be in somebody's head, but the man is walking on the side of the highway. And the last time they successfully riled everybody up, we had a vehicle attack in Winnipeg. And again, I'll say the title of the title of the live stream is that globalist news is just ISIS, and that is effectively the way ISIS works, right? Or worked. They're utterly decimated at this moment, but it wasn't so much that you needed to be a member or join a club or go to a meeting or take any of their training. All you really had to do was help them in their struggle to bring about the global caliphate and destroy the West and the like. So we had cases, I remember back then, when the media was, really running cover for Islamic terror in the United States in particular. We had a few good years under Trump where there wasn't too much of that going on, but even when there were things like the San Bernardino shooting, they were really reluctant to show their faces, say their names, because it was an ISIS attack. And they were, obviously Muslim extremists, so they didn't want to make that connection to radical Islam, and they wouldn't tell us who they were. And it was the same thing with the Pulse nightclub shooting. And we had the same thing happen in Canada here with Nathan Cirillo, of course. Michael Zihalpi-Bo went to all the trouble of recording a video pledging allegiance to ISIS, and you never saw that released in the media, and I don't think the RCMP ever let it out either. And so he was motivated to kill infidels because he ascribed to that ideology. And so you have to wonder if Rachel Gilmore's ideological adherents, say over on the regressive left side of things, if they're motivated to show just what good people they are, then might they not, take up the cause, so to speak, and engage in another vehicle attack, this time against James Topp, but once again on behalf of globalist news. Yeah.
Well, it was interesting because I do follow her on Twitter. And I looked when she yesterday reported this firearms threat to a member of her family. She had a lot of support on there, and she also had a lot of people calling her out on Twitter, basically saying, well, shouldn't you maybe go to the police instead of doing Twitter about this thing? Report it. And then a lot of people were calling her out and saying, hey, you make a lot of false accusations. Where's the proof? Where's the police number? And somebody actually called and called the police, and the police wouldn't confirm or deny that an incident even took place, which I find really, really interesting that the police will do that. But yet, I have it on good authority that the media right now is reporting that Jeremy McKenzie is about to be charged again by the RCMP. Yet Jeremy hasn't been told by the RCMP, right? Like, don't you usually tell the person you're going to charge with a crime first before you run to the media? And yet we have a case with Rachel where she's actually, the police won't confirm it to anybody or the media. Like it's so upside down, this perverted relationship between law enforcement in the media right now. It blows my mind. But what's encouraging to see is how how much pushback Rachel is starting to get on her social media as well. I think people are starting to see through it. I mean, she's a young, relatively attractive person, so she, I think, obviously uses that as her form of clickbait, but no substance, no substance whatsoever.
No,
She's a social media rising star. She's not a journalist that actually reports good quality content. She just looks for something divisive, something very, and then if it goes against her, she claims victim. If it goes in her favor, she probably quotes journalistic integrity. It's pretty bad. It's really bad.
It's gross.
Yeah,
and since you mentioned Jeremy McKenzie, facing new charges.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah. This is what it's all about. Is this picture here?
Yeah.
It says Jeremy McKenzie, bottom left, is seen at a shooting party in Saskatchewan in November of 2021.
Yeah.
So this is Saskatchewan. This is like rural Saskatchewan. Of course, they've got firearms and stuff like that around. Now, this was a joke. He talked about it on the Viva Fry podcast. There was a whole barbecue and picnic and stuff going on around here, and they were all joking about how they were, we're diagonal on a bunch of terrorists and stuff.
Yeah.
The thing to realize here is that nothing came of this photo. Like Diagolon has never attacked anybody or anything like that. Like,
and even Jeremy said the other day, he said, if that was a deer, like if they were standing in front posing with a deer, this wouldn't be a thing, right? It was a joke that they just posed with the flag.
The flag, yeah.
And by the way, Jeremy created that symbol with his thumb on his iPhone in about 3 seconds.
Yeah. And it's something that it's a joke that they were doing on the podcast there, the diagonal country, sort of a consolidation of states from Florida up through the Midwest into the prairies and Alaska. And it'd be like a super country, because they were looking at the way the mandates were going, and Florida being the freest state in the union, and you kind of follow it up into the Midwest and out west, and it's like, all the freest places are just kind of like right along here. So it was going to be a super country Diagolon or something. So it's all very ridiculous.
Yes, and I have to say it's been great, because Diagolon has been trending for a couple days on Twitter. When everybody's piling on, and that interview that Viva Fry did with Jeremy 2 days ago was outstanding. Like, it's probably one of the best Viva interviews I've seen. It really, he clarified a lot of the stuff and the absurdity of this, because I remember being in Ottawa when Jeremy put out one of his videos on, I don't know what platform it was, and I called him right away. I said, Jeremy, tell me everything there is to know about Diagolon right now. And because he showed the video where him and the other guys are laughing hysterically, and then they show the pictures of the TV where the Liberals are talking about Diagolon being a justification for invoking the Emergency Act. And it was hilarious and terrifying at the same time. That the Liberal government would be using Diagolon as a justification to attack its own people. It doesn't exist. It's a joke. It's a joke. Yeah.
And it's been turned into a really sick joke here, because they're playing games with people's lives. Don't forget, I don't have to tell you guys that bank accounts were frozen. But this was the justification that they used for unprecedented measures in Canadian history to declare war on their own citizens. And you would think that if you're going to declare war on your own citizens, that you better damn well have your ducks in a row. But that doesn't appear to be the case here.
Here's a question, though, about this, since we're talking about media and Rachel. I would think that Rachel would have got, she probably would have got a Pulitzer had she come out with her media outlet and actually said, hey, wait a minute. You guys know that this Diagolon thing is a joke, right? And Justin Trudeau invoked the Emergency Act, like actually exposed it, and actually exposed the RCMP for their gross incompetence in terms of the biggest intelligence blunder in recent Canadian history. No, she piled on the government's narrative, because they funnel our tax dollars towards her salary. So she could have actually this was her grand opportunity to establish herself as an actual journalist, done the right story, told the truth about this, And, you know, she didn't. She just let that pitch go right by and jumped onto the gravy train of you know, government-funded media.
Yeah,
She had a golden opportunity.
and you know, I think she really thinks that she's probably the good guy in all of this. That's what's so terrifying about it,
Yeah.
right? Like I think
Yeah.
all the megalomaniacs of history probably thought that they were the good guy, even when they were, you know,
Yeah.
murdering their own people and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's just the way people's minds work. They can kind of tell themselves any story to make themselves the good guy in their own minds. And that's the one that you really got to watch out for, is the one who doesn't realize that, who seems to think that they're somehow above all of these lower human flaws and stuff like that. They're just as flawed as the rest of us, and they need to be mindful of the whys and the hows of what they're doing, just like the rest of us. And as we can see, we have some very unwise people with a lot of influence in our society right now, and they're all in the woke mob. So I think she's just a wokester. She's indoctrinated, basically a radical, and they're the ones who have the megaphone of the media in their hand right now. And I just want to clarify this one little thing right here, because you see, the reason they're reaching all the way back to November of 2021 to get this joke photo to make them all look like they're some kind of violent extremists is because Jeremy shook hands with Pierre Poilievre. So the target here is really Pierre Poilievre. And the aspect of that we're really trying to highlight here today is they don't care who they hurt or who they kill to get Pierre out of there. They just want to win. They don't give a goddamn about any of our lives, and or who they throw under the bus. If they'll throw a guy like James Topp under the bus, he didn't mention Iraq either. He was in Iraq too, and you know, like this is a guy. If there's anybody out there who's above reproach, it's probably he'd be a damn good candidate for it. And you know, so that just goes to show you like the lengths to which they're willing to go. Like they'll do it to you too if they do it to these guys. Jeremy's a sacrifice medal recipient, you know, and so these are heroes. And if they'll do it to our heroes and all the best people in our society, then they'll do it to you too. So they are the bad guys. Make no mistake about that.
This is the article that. Go ahead, Tom. Go ahead.
One last sort of thought here before we sort of close this thing out. If you notice the complaint by the Canadian Association of Journalists, of which Rachel Gilmore was one of the primary signatories, you know, they're going, the police need to create a database of threats. The police need to react to this. And then she's, you know, the police aren't taking me seriously when I make these comments. Something really fascinating is going on here. The Canadian journalists, led by people like Rachel Gilmore, are trying to get, you know, the Ottawa police, the RCMP, the OPP or whatever, to become their enforcement arm so that they can say whatever they want and get away with it. But if anybody complains and pushes back on them, then you will be subjected to police action. And you can see the police forces here are struggling because they've got their superiors telling them, oh, you know, you must do this, you must back them up. But you've got the middle ranking guys that do the actual work going, yeah, our job as police is not to become the brown shirts to support the ideologues. That's not our job. It's not our role. We've seen the courts do the same thing to a certain degree with Tamara Leash, where a couple of those judges have come out and said, whoa, hang on just a second here. It's not the job of the judiciary to support or sort out the politicians' own problems. So what we're seeing is a big push from government and the Canadian Association of Journalists to turn the judiciary and the police forces into the enforcement arm of political ideology in Canada. So watch this one. The complaint that they're putting forward, I say, is deadly serious. What they're talking about is they're trying to shut down anyone who dares speak out against them. So they say the most outrageous things, smear people with the worst lies, and then when it kicks back on them, they claim victim status and they want everyone else shut down. That's very serious. The other quick thought here is when people go on about Jeremy and Diagolon and it's a threat to national security, I look at it and say, you know, it's like Homer Simpson. Homer Simpson is a threat to nuclear safety. He's an alcoholic. He sleeps on the job. He pours coffee on the panel of a nuclear reactor. And he is the perfect example of why we need better controls in nuclear safety. Except it's not real. It's a cartoon. Get over it. Homer Simpson is not real. Diagolon is not real. Jeremy McKenzie has just created a meme. He's created a Homer Simpson, and everybody's freaking out over it. So anyway, end of that rant.
Well, I want to say one extra thing to that, though, because I couldn't agree more with you, Tom, because we're on the side of absurdity here. But here's the thing. The more they do this, the more they dig in, double down, whatever you want to say on Diagolon, the more, in my view, it literally is going to blow up in the government's face. It is going to, after the public inquiry, this has the potential to be a pivotal factor that brings down the Liberal government. That's what I truly believe. When we get through the public inquiry, we start talking about all the holes in the justification that Trudeau used, and this comes out that he used a cartoon as justification to attack his own people. I don't know. Do you think that there's any possibility whatsoever that this judge is going to come out and say, well, it was justified attacking your own people? I don't think so. I think what's going to happen is it's going to be revealed that this invocation of the Emergency Act was completely unjustified, which is then going to trigger a vote of non-confidence. How can you be ruled, or how can it be deemed that you unjustly attacked your own citizens with a never before used act unjustly and then still survive as a government? I don't know. So I think that, there's like Drew likes to say, it's short-term pain for long-term gain. Mm-hmm. We just got to make sure that, that let them report on it. We'll keep speaking the truth. We'll push back. But in the end, this is going to reveal itself as a major, major factor in potentially a vote of non-confidence in the future. So
I'll keep my fingers crossed.
Yeah.
But I won't hold my breath.
Well, he is pretty Teflon, isn't he? Like, how many scandals can this guy actually
unbelievably Teflon. I guess I think I don't know who all is necessarily going to testify there, but I think it would be interesting to maybe have Jeremy give some testimony at that public inquiry, just to give his side of the story. And I know that that's risky, and it's really up to him. And I don't want to, put any undue pressure on him to make a decision one way or another. Not that he listens to my podcast; he's busy enough with his own. But I understand that some people are kind of saying, oh, maybe he shouldn't do it because he's so colorful and he's he's a bit of a character and he's right off the wall, and the way he's going to come across is this, and the way that they're going to try to paint him is that. But my hope is that people kind of see right through it, because there's this element to it that I find is just really so grotesque. Like, you're talking about a sacrifice medal recipient. He's combat wounded. He's a combat veteran. Like, he's a troubled guy. Like, probably not much more than most of us, or many of us. But he's a troubled guy. He's I don't want to say that he's like downtrodden or anything like that, but this is punching down. Like, you have people who are really powerful, really doing everything they can to kind of destroy this guy, and he's never done anything but serve the country and call out injustice where he sees it in his own way. So again, like, if they do it to him, they will do it to anybody, and I just find it so gross. And I hope, I guess my hope would be that if he got to take the stand, that the rest of Canada could see that for themselves as well.
I hope he does. I really want him to take the stand, because I believe Jeremy understands fully the gravity of the situation is. He's not going to show up as, podcast Jeremy. He's not going to show up as raging dissident. He's going to show up as Jeremy McKenzie, the soldier, the serious citizen who is going to tell truth to power. And so I think, there's no doubt in my mind that Jeremy could handle any cross-examination. And I know there has been discussion between Jeremy, the lawyers, and him about Jeremy testifying. And my only advice to him was, make sure it's done under subpoena, because then you're protected under your charter rights, that anything you say during that testimony can not be used against you in subsequent legal action of any kind. You just don't give a voluntary statement. You just got to make sure that it's under subpoena, and then tell your story. And I think that his story is going to be a vitally important piece of this larger puzzle. So I encourage Jeremy to if he's subpoenaed to go. Well, he has to if he's subpoenaed, but he should speak. I think Canadians should hear from him and put this to rest in the middle of that important public inquiry.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's under a lot of pressure, though, like legally, and they really are coming after him. And so that's really something like he's got to weigh out with his legal team and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I guess it's like a wish, that he would do exactly as you're saying and maybe get up there and show Canada what's really going on, and they could all get it kind of straight from the horse's mouth, and realize just kind of the gross abuse of our citizenry that's taking place right now at the hands of this regime. Because I mean, it's just terrible. He's just a regular guy just trying to live his life, and I think he even says himself, like, they just kind of built up that Diagolon community of a bunch of other similarly minded people, and a lot of them are veterans too. So they just kind of get together and tell some jokes and do a few rants and stuff like that. Like, it's just a social group more than anything, and for peer support. And it's terrible to see them getting just put down upon in that way from some of the people at the highest levels of our institutions. So and that article that you put up there, that iPolitics, the interesting thing about that is Jeremy sent it to me last night, and I looked at it, and the interesting thing about that is he hasn't been formally contacted by the RCMP, but yet that article was published. Why is it that the media knows Jeremy is facing new charges, but the actual person who's accused doesn't? And, even if he is arrested and he's incarcerated, he's still subpoenaed. He can still testify at the public inquiry, whether he's in jail or not. So, you might go after him for some sort of bizarre charge now, but it's not going to stop him from testifying at the public inquiry if he is subpoenaed. Right. And I just want to point out, because there are often parallels in Canada now with things that happen in the United States. It seems to me that there's some monkey see, monkey do going on between the Liberal Party of Canada and the Democrats down in the United States. And one incident that springs to mind was the persecution of Roger Stone, who is, has been active on the political scene for a long time, and he's a published author, and he's got an enormous back tattoo of Richard Nixon, which I just think is great. So he's a bit of a kooky guy or whatever, and they ransacked his home, because he was out there saying things about that were disfavorable of the regime, and it seems like the pressure on the police right now is to go out and do that, especially on behalf of the Trudeau regime and the Liberal Party. So we can expect to see more of this, I think, coming in the future. Like they're trying to borrow pages out of that playbook, it seems. And start turning the judiciary against dissidents like Roger Stone, like General Flynn was another one, because he was against the Obama foreign policy, which I think is really just deep state foreign policy. He was kind of turning everything on its head there with a lot of the folks cutting the Pentagon out of a lot of the really important stuff, because they were kind of getting in the way and things like that. And so these are the folks that they're going after. It's anybody who's a threat to their power, and they're absolutely using the judiciary and the like to they're abusing state power to go after anybody who opposes them. So keep an eye out for that, folks. But Tom Quiggan, I'll throw back over to you here to maybe get another comment in before we wrap this up. What do you say, Tom?
I think, the final thought is the entire article by Rachel Gilmore is fundamentally wrong. The basic facts are absolutely wrong. And the irony and the humor in it is the whole article is complaining that other people aren't vetting correctly and they don't really get the real information. So on the one hand, it's absolutely hilarious. She writes this great big long article scandalizing people for not getting the correct information before they make decisions. And her article is just fundamentally wrong. It's hilarious on one hand, but it's terrifying this kind of junk is allowed out there in the mainstream media.
Yeah, it is terrifying because now we have a situation where leftist radicals all over the country have this idea in their head that, James Topp is maybe somebody who needs to be taken out, like the Winnipeg protesters. So this is dangerous games that they're playing with good people's lives. And it's really downright despicable and gross, especially when you start factoring in like who these people really are, who James Topp really is, and who our sacrifice medal recipients like Jeremy McKenzie really is. I think that's about it for me. Tom, do you want to offer a final thought before we go here?
I think just it was kind of alluded to in this conversation that each sort of industry, the courts, the police, the media, they all seem to deputize each other into their own sadistic little circle. And I think people are starting to wake up to this idea that, when I put my monologue out, I talk about this relationship, this circular relationship between law enforcement and media. And this has become a very dangerous thing. And I think people have to start to really pick up on how the media deputizes the police deputize the media into their own little ridiculous war against the people.
Mm-hmm.
We just got to be aware, be very vigilant that this is an actual practice.
And I can attest to that fact based on the disclosure package I got for my trial in Ottawa, which is set for 2023. That's for getting arrested during the convoy and then again at Rolling Thunder, because attending Rolling Thunder was actually a breach of my conditions that I signed from the convoy. They have like my social media posts in there. So it's got nothing to do with anything that's in the criminal code anywhere. They're just saying like, this is one of those bad guys because he thinks this and he posts stuff like this. So they're identifying me as a dissident and a threat to the regime is essentially what's happening there. And I was just kind of looking for where they had it in here. But I just wanted to reiterate the part where they were talking about political due diligence, and then they start giving examples of where people on the left side of the aisle have gone wrong, and they're giving examples like Jaspal Otwal, who's a known violent terrorist who attempted an assassination. And so everybody they're showing like and saying, they probably should have vetted this guy better. On the left side are known violent terrorists, where on the right side, they're making these really tacit, really loose associations because this person spoke at that rally that was organized by these people, and they say these things, which could, if they were in a different context than they actually were, be something that was racially charged. But they're not, because in the full context, they're about public policy. These are the kinds of tactics that they're into here. So the irony is not lost, I guess. That's a pretty stark contrast. No violence is required if you're on the right side of the aisle or just against the current regime and its human rights abuses. And they're willing basically to say anything about you and care not for the kind of damage or even the lives that it costs in the fallout. So anyway, I think that that's a good note to end things on, guys. And I appreciate you guys for being so generous with your time as usual. We got a really good discussion in here, and we'll stay frosty and stay safe out there, troops.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Cheers.
Cheers.